5 years ago, I was invited to speak to a group of Francophone lawyers in Quebec City, all French speaking. The whole event was in French, but I won't share it with you in French. I'll do it by way of translation. My topic was, at the time, the Genocide Convention 60 years later. What have we learned? What must we do? Just fast forward to 65 years later, it's the same approach. And I shared some 5 enduring lessons with the audience. I won't bore or burden you with that at this point. But at the end of my talk, I sat down and a woman got up and said the following. She said, Professor Cotler, I'm a lawyer in the Department of Justice. I was a lawyer when you were the Minister of Justice, and there was something that we always wanted to ask you. Your talk this evening, gives us an opportunity to do so. In your talk about the 5 great lessons of the last 60 years, you didn't mention a word about Palestinian suffering. You didn't mention a word about the Nakba, the catastrophe that occurred to the Palestinian people and Palestinian refugees. Can you tell us why in all your great historical lessons you didn't mention a word about the Palestinians and Palestinian refugees? And my answer to her was as follows. I said, you're right. The Palestinians have suffered and continue to suffer. By the way, had I started right away with an attack, I would have lost the debate right there. I said, you're right, the Palestinians have suffered and continue to suffer. I said, you're right, they suffered a Nakba, a catastrophe, 60 years ago. I said, the question is, what is it that happened 60 years? Just add 5 years when I say, what did happen 60 years ago? 60 years ago, I said, the United Nations adopted a partition resolution recommending the partition of then mandatory Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. I said the Jewish leadership supported the resolution. The Arab and Palestinian leadership did not. I said, mind you, they had a right not to support the resolution if they felt it was not cognizant with their interests. But what they didn't have a right to do was to then launch a war of aggression, by their words, a war of extermination against the nascent Jewish state. What they didn't have a right to do was to then turn on their own Jewish nationals, disenfranchising them, dispossessing them of their property, arresting them, detaining them, torturing them, expelling them. So as a result of these 2 acts of aggression against the Israeli state, against their own Jewish nationals, there were 2 sets of refugees, Palestinian refugees and Jewish refugees from Arab countries. I said it's a tragedy to think that had the Arab and Palestinian leadership accepted that resolution 60 years ago, today we would be commemorating the 60th anniversary of 2 states for 2 peoples. And I sat down. And then she got up, and this is where it dovetails directly with what Jerry Nadler said, but coming from a different perspective. She got up and said, she said, can I make a comment? I said, sure. She said, I consider myself a reasonably well-informed person. I follow public affairs, as I mentioned. I'm a lawyer in the Department of Justice. This is the first I've ever heard about Jewish refugees from Arab countries. She said, I knew about Palestinian Arab refugees, but I always thought that this resulted from Jewish ethnic cleansing of Palestinian Arab refugees. She said, I'm now beginning to learn a little bit more about what happened. She said, yes, there was a Nakba to the Palestinians, but it appears that there was also a Nakba for the Jews, if I can use the term, and she used it, and I then wrote an article about it. She says, a double Nakba. But more importantly, as a lawyer, I can now appreciate where the responsibility falls, that it falls with those who created the double Nakba for both the Jews and the Palestinian refugees. I think that that story and that of Jerry Nadler's is the raison d'etre for why we are here today. It makes the case, it frames the narrative for tzedek, for justice, for Jewish refugees from Arab countries. So I just want to commend the organizers for this. I'm delighted that this conference has been put together. It's timely, it's necessary, it is in the pursuit of justice, as Dan Diker said, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, and I look forward to hearing the views tomorrow, the witness testimony in particular, and at the end of the day, moving us forward in advance of our common cause. Thank you.